Hi guys, I'm Kat and today I have for you of course a true crime case and also a word in Romanian. So the word for today is răpire. 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 Well done guys, you just said kidnapping. Oh boy, today's case is unbelievable. It really is unbelievable. Today's case is a true example of taking justice in your own hands when a parent would do anything to bring their child's killer to justice. So this case is happening between Germany and France, and I will try my best to pronounce the words correctly, but I'm not really good at German or French, so I'll do my best. In the village of Seidegg, southern Germany, Dr. Dieter Krombach is being abducted. The three kidnappers punched him in the face, tied him up, gagged him, and threw him in the back of their car. They then drove 150 miles, crossing the border into the Alsace region of France, with Dr. Dieter on the floor between the seats. The car stops in the town of Mulhouse. One of the kidnappers calls the local police and stays on the line just long enough to give them some weird instructions. Quote, "Go to the Rue du Tilou across from the customs office. You will find a man tied up." End of quote. A couple of minutes later, two police cars arrived to the scene. Dr. Dieter lay on the ground with his hands and feet bound and his mouth gagged. He was roughed up, but he was alive. When the police removed the mouth gag, the first thing he said was, "Bamberski is behind it." Dr. Dieter referred to Andre Bamberski, but in his 70s, it seemed highly unlikely that he would be a kidnapper. Okay, so let's travel back in time a bit. Dieter and Andre Bamberski had very similar lives. Both of them grew up in Europe, ravaged at the time by World War II, and both witnessed the horrors of the conflict firsthand. Dieter, born in 1935 in Dresden, was the son of a Wehrmacht officer, Nazi Germany army, and when Dieter was 9 years old, he survived the Allied firebombing that killed at least 30,000 civilians. Andre Bamberski, born in 1937, was the son of Polish Catholics who emigrated to France in the early 1930s. He was living with his grandparents in the Polish region of Galicia in September 1939 when the Nazis invaded Poland. There he witnessed starvation, street fighting and executions by the Nazi SS. In 1945, in Lille, France, he was reunited with his parents by the International Committee of the Red Cross. Andre became a chartered accountant and Dieter became a doctor of internal medicine. However, they didn't know each other. Both built middle-class lives, affluence and apparent domestic harmony. They both married and had children in the 1960s. But, like I said, they didn't know each other. In 1974, both of them found themselves living on the same street in the Moroccan city of Casablanca. Dieter as a physician attached to the German consulate and Andre as an accountant. Their children attended the same international school. And it was there in Casablanca that Dieter began an affair with Danielle Gounin, Andre's wife. Danielle was an attractive woman in her 30s, the daughter of French expats who settled in Morocco in the 1950s. Andre wasn't aware of Danielle's infidelities when the family left Morocco in 1974 and settled in Pechbask, not far from where Danielle grew up. Dieter also left Morocco and he moved to Bavaria. Then, in 1975, Danielle told her husband that she found a position in a real estate office in Nice, 350 miles to the east. She said she planned to rent an apartment there during the week and then come back home during the weekends. She refused, however, to give Andre the name or the telephone number of the company. Being suspicious of this, Andre followed her one Sunday evening and he saw Danielle. Instead of driving towards Nice, she parked her car in the garage of an apartment building in Toulouse. She stayed there for the rest of the week. When Andre asked the concierge about her, the man replied that the woman is Madame Krombach, as in Dieter Krombach. Needless to say that Andre and Daniel divorced. Daniel joined Dieter in Bavaria in 1975 and they got married in 1977. She initially gave custody rights to Andre and the children stayed with him in France. But in July 1980, Andre decided to return with the children back to Morocco. Days after he left France, Daniel filed a complaint against him in a Toulouse court demanding custody. He was advised by his attorney not to challenge this motion. Daniel's civil case included an accusation of non-presentation of children. So, Andre gave custody and he settled again in Pays Basque. In July 1980, their two children, Kalinka and Nicolas, moved with their mother and Dr. Dieter in Lindau. Andre agreed to see his children only during holidays. But the thing is that Dieter had a dark side to him. During his marriage to his first wife, Monika Henze, she died suddenly at age 24. A statement given years later to German police by her mother alleged that Dieter, in the 1960s, a promising young doctor of internal medicine who graduated with honors from the University of Frankfurt, terrorized his wife, beat her, and even threatened to kill her. In 1969, Monika was stricken with a mysterious illness that rendered her mute and blind and then paralyzed her. According to her mother's account, Dieter elbowed aside the attending physician at the Frankfurt hospital and administered an injection of what he identified as snake venom. Monika died hours later of a cerebral hemorrhage. There was no definitive connection made between the injection and Monika's death. It was officially attributed to a thrombosis of the basilar artery which supplies blood to the brain. In the 1980s, Dieter repeatedly drugged Daniel with sedatives so that he could carry on affairs downstairs while she slept in the second-floor bedroom. Daniel, his current wife, Andre's ex. Remember that she cheated on Andre with him, and for more than a decade, Dieter administered intravenous anesthetics to a series of women in his medical examination room where he raped them as they lay unconscious. So now, we need to jump to when Andre is in his 40s. I'm hoping it's not getting too confusing. Until 1982, Andre was a quiet and polite gentleman. He was an accountant and the loving father of an outgoing young girl, Kalinka, and a handsome boy, Nicolas. That year, in 1982, Kalinka attended a French language high school in the small German city of Freiburg as a boarder, and she spent most weekends and summers in Lindau with her mother, Andre's ex-wife, and her new husband, 47-year-old Dr. Dieter Krombach, her stepfather. Almost 15 years old, Kalinka was a really pretty girl, lively, outgoing, with blonde hair and blue eyes, who really loved windsurfing, but most importantly, she was a healthy teenager with no serious health concerns. But Kalinka really missed home. She was getting homesick. She spoke barely any German, although she lived in Bavaria. She was looking forward to August when she would move back in with her father in Pays Basque, a suburb of Toulouse in southwest France. Okay, so before we move any further, again with the names. I'm going to apologize again in advance. I'm struggling to pronounce both French and German, and like I said, today's case focuses between Germany and France, so you know, be warned. It has a lot of twists and turns and it's just completely unbelievable, but I'm going to try and break it down for you so it's not so confusing. On Friday, 9th of July 1982, Kalinka Bamberski windsurfed on Lake Constance, a lake that borders Germany, Austria and Switzerland. At around 5 in the afternoon, she returned home, obviously tired, and according to her stepfather and her mother, she was complaining that she wasn't feeling that well. They sat down for dinner at 7:30 p.m. Kalinka then went to bed quite early, but she woke up to have a glass of water at around 10 p.m. And according to her stepfather, Dr. Dieter, she read in her downstairs bedroom until midnight when he asked her to turn off the light. The next morning, before 10 a.m., the 47-year-old Dieter, in his equestrian clothes, getting ready for his morning ride through the nearby mountains, came downstairs and tried to wake Kalinka up. He found her still lying in bed on her right side, sadly deceased. Her body was already in rigor mortis, suggesting she had been deceased for at least a few hours. Dieter would later tell medical examiners that he tried to revive her with an injection directly into her heart of coramine, a central nervous system stimulant, and doses of two other stimulants, Novodigal and Isoptin, in her legs. But he was hours too late. An autopsy put the time of death between 3 and 4 a.m. At around 10:30 on Saturday morning, Andre receives a call at his home, which was 3 miles south of Toulouse in France, and his ex-wife, Kalinka's mother, tells him the devastating news of their child's death. The 45-year-old Andre sank into a chair, completely speechless. Kalinka was a healthy, athletic teenager with almost no history of medical issues. He questioned his wife about this. How was it possible? She told Andre that her husband, Dr. Dieter, explained that either Kalinka could have suffered heat stroke because of the overexposure to the sun the previous day when she was windsurfing, or she could have died from the long delayed effects of a 1974 car accident in Morocco where she sustained a head injury. But something was not quite right with the reasons given by Dr. Dieter, one of them being that she possibly suffered a heat stroke. Well, when she went windsurfing on Lake Constance, the temperature outside was in the 20 degrees Celsius, so I think that it's almost impossible or nearly impossible to suffer a heat stroke at 20 degrees Celsius weather. But Andre was still left puzzled and he was overwhelmed with grief. He flew to Zurich and rented a car at the airport. Driving the 50 miles east towards Lake Constance, the only thing he could think about was his daughter and her death. He was just devastated. Kalinka was the joy of his life. Andre checked into a hotel and early on Sunday morning he drove to the hospital to see Kalinka's body, which was already in a refrigerated drawer in the morgue. Andre said a prayer over his dead daughter, who was still in the white socks and red nightshirt she had worn to bed 2 nights earlier. Later that morning, he and his 11-year-old son, Nicolas, Kalinka's brother, who was also living with his mother and stepfather, flew home to Toulouse, France, to wait for the arrival of Kalinka's body for burial. For Andre, the shock and horror of Kalinka's death were combined with the mystery surrounding it. For him, it was inexplicable how his healthy daughter, after a day of normal activity, could be found dead in her own bed. Even though, as a Catholic, he was a very religious man and could find some consolation in his faith, he also felt that God alone couldn't help him make sense of this loss. Very soon, Andre's suspicions turned towards the last person to see Kalinka alive, her stepfather, Dr. Dieter Krombach. For the next 3 decades, 3 decades, guys, you heard me right, for the next 3 decades, Andre would pursue Dieter across Europe in a continuous attempt to establish responsibility for his daughter's death. This would be 30 years Andre was really devoted. This campaign would leave Andre isolated and at legal risk, with his judgment and even his sanity questioned. He would lose touch with friends, family and colleagues. He would be accused of crossing moral and legal lines, of losing perspective, of going deep into baseless conspiracy theories. Nicolas, his only surviving child, would find himself torn between his parents. By the end, even Andre's own attorney, one of France's most respected jurists, would declare himself unable to support his client in his campaign. Andre would leave his job, spend almost all of his life savings and devote thousands of hours to pursuing his goal. But Andre insisted. It was not an obsession. It was a promise that he made to Kalinka to give her justice. In the weeks following Kalinka's death, Andre wasn't really suspicious of any wrongdoing. His ex-wife and her new husband, Dr. Dieter, attended Kalinka's burial in the church cemetery in Pechbas, and they seemed just as sad and shaken as Andre was. But as time passed, Andre started to question the facts surrounding Kalinka's death. In early October 1982, he finally received a translated copy of his daughter's autopsy report. He learned from the report that Dr. Homan, a forensic physician in a nearby town, carried out the autopsy, joined by the police superintendent of Lindau, the local prosecutor, and guess who else? The same Dr. Dieter, Kalinka's stepfather, which was, I might add, not only a breach of protocol, but also really strange. Andre was just astonished to find this out, but the revelations in the report were something else, especially the omissions in the report. Dr. Homan discovered blood on Kalinka's private parts and the thick whitish greenish substance inside. Are you guys thinking what I'm thinking? 3, 2, 1. Semen. Dr. Homan also noticed a fresh puncture mark on Kalinka's right upper arm caused by an intravenous injection of cobalt ferlicite, a controversial iron supplement, a cobalt iron preparation. In the report, Dr. Dieter, her stepfather, admitted giving Kalinka the injection before dinner on Friday evening, apparently to help her tan. But he would later change his story and say that it was in fact to treat her anemia. So you know that by now we already know when they change their story, something is just not right, because when you say the truth, there is only one version of the truth. The truth. It never changes. Dr. Homan didn't conduct any toxicology tests on the blood or tissue, neither did he determine whether Kalinka was a virgin. Instead, the report declared that the cause of death was unknown, and Dr. Homan sent tissue and blood samples to a forensics lab. After reading the report 3 months later, Andre had so many questions. What was Dieter doing at the autopsy? Why didn't he mention anything about the injection before? And what did the toxicology reports determine? Dying so far from home, Kalinka's father, Andre, was feeling like he failed his daughter. He wasn't able to protect Kalinka. This pushed him even harder to find answers to the questions around her death. His suspicions grew even stronger when he called his ex-wife and asked her about the tests. She promised that she would talk to Dieter and get back to him, but she didn't. So Andre called back 2 days later, and that's when she told him that the test had not been conducted. Andre just couldn't believe this. Kalinka died with her mother and stepfather, her husband is a doctor, and neither one of them seemed interested to find out Kalinka's cause of death. Andre's ex-wife answered, according to him, quote, Kalinka died because it was her time to die, end of quote. Of course that Andre disagreed, and I mean anyone in his position would disagree. It was clear at this point for Andre that Dieter raped Kalinka and then killed her with an injection, maybe to silence her. Andre consulted 2 forensic doctors in Toulouse, France, who both agreed that his suspicions had merit. They pointed to the autopsy report's references to Kalinka's torn genitals and the presence of a fluid that resembled semen. According to Andre, the doctors told him, quote, they never tested a 15-year-old girl to determine whether she'd had sexual intercourse. It looks like they wanted to hide something, end of quote. Andre's friends also supported his conviction that something was really wrong. Andre's neighbor, Elizabeth Aragon, also read the autopsy report in October. She said that Andre really wanted someone to tell him that he wasn't dreaming, and Elizabeth, along with his friends, had exactly the same suspicions as Andre. Following pressure from Andre's attorneys, the local German prosecutor ordered more tests to be done, and in February and March 1983, a forensic scientist at the Medical Legal Institute of Munich, Wolfgang Spann, studied the tissue samples. The scientist, Wolfgang, condemned Dieter for using a dangerous substance, one which has no value for tan enhancement and one that, even used to treat anemia, should be given only in very rare instances. He reported that cobalt ferlicite, if administered without close supervision, especially after eating, could lead to nausea, fever, vomiting, and in extreme cases, respiratory failure or cardiac arrest. And considering also that Dr. Dieter was a cardiologist, he shouldn't even have had access to this injection. The presence of food particles in Kalinka's lungs and esophagus suggested that that was exactly what happened. After receiving the injection, Kalinka went into anaphylactic shock, she lost consciousness and asphyxiated on her own vomit. Wolfgang determined that Dieter misled authorities about the time that passed between the injection and Kalinka's death. The absence of any evidence of an immune response in the surrounding tissue indicated that Kalinka's death had been almost immediate after the injection. However, Wolfgang was inconclusive about rape. Under his questioning, Dr. Hohmann, who conducted the first autopsy, maintained that the tear in Kalinka's labia happened post-mortem and her hymen was not ruptured, which Dr. Hohmann believed indicated that she was still a virgin. However, Dr. Hohmann concluded that the hymen was large enough that penetration could have taken place. On the ultimate matter of Kalinka's death, however, another expert, a professor of pharmacology named Peter Scanhofer, concluded that the intravenous injection of cobalt ferricide had probably led to the death of Kalinka Bamberski. But that wasn't enough evidence for the local prosecutor. Without a statement of scientific certainty, he closed the criminal investigation into Kalinka Bamberski's death. Days later, the Prosecutor General of Munich, the highest ranking government attorney in the state of Bavaria, backed the prosecutor's decisions. Officials never explained why. Oh boy, yep. Given the evidence of wrongdoing or negligent homicide, they didn't investigate Dr. Dieter any further. It would later be learned as well that the emergency physician who pronounced Kalinka dead in her bed never called the police to the scene because Dieter was very insistent that Kalinka's body be delivered directly to the morgue. Over 1 year after Kalinka's death, Andre decided to strike back against the man he believed killed his daughter. He traveled to Lindau during Oktoberfest and walked through town passing out flyers from a satchel. The flyers had a photo of Kalinka and a warning. People of Lindau, you should know that the murderer, Dieter Krombach, is living in your city. He raped and murdered my daughter on 10th of July 1982 and his crime has been covered up by doctors, the police commissioner and the prosecutors. Please help me obtain justice. He walked the lakeside promenade and the town center distributing 2,000 copies at homes, beer gardens and outdoor cafes which were full of people. Later that same afternoon, Andre was attacked by Boris Krombach, Dieter's 17-year-old son, and Diana Krombach, his 19-year-old daughter, accompanied by 2 policemen. The police arrested Andre, interrogated him and charged him with defaming Dieter, disturbing the public order and injuring the reputation of the prosecutor. After 24 hours in police custody, Andre was ordered to turn over all the cash in his possession, about 2,000 Deutschmarks or $1,000 as bond. 3 months later, Andre was sentenced in absence to 6 months in prison or a fine of 400,000 Deutschmarks, an onerous penalty that would make it impossible for him to set foot in Germany again until the statute of limitations ran out 5 years later. Even if the German authorities arrested Andre instead of Kalinka's killer Dieter, Andre still had some plans. Because Kalinka was a French citizen, French authorities could launch their own murder investigation on German soil, and if the evidence was deemed sufficient, they could issue an international warrant for Dieter's arrest. In 1985, after 2 years of persistence from Andre, the French authorities exhumed Kalinka's remains. This failed to provide any new clues to her death, but it did reveal one disturbing fact that cast further doubt on the German investigation. Her private parts, get ready for this, her private parts had been removed completely during the autopsy and neither of the German forensic labs that handled the remains could turn up a trace of them. The question of whether Dieter raped Kalinka before her death could therefore never be determined with certainty. So I think it's safe to assume that Dieter allegedly made sure that there was no evidence of rape. If you remember, the autopsy found a thick white greeny substance in Kalinka's intimate area, which was consistent with semen. So if that part is entirely removed, then the trace is entirely removed. Very clever, but it's no surprise though, is it? Dieter is a doctor. He knows what he's doing. This fueled Andre's suspicions of a conspiracy to protect Dieter even more. It seemed quite strange that a physician in a Bavarian town would receive special treatment by the government, but perhaps Andre thought Dieter established connections during his 2 years at the German consulate in Casablanca. Maybe he worked in German intelligence. German authorities always denied that Dieter was protected, and no evidence has ever been found to suggest that he was. In 1988, German authorities complied with a request from French prosecutors, and they sent lung, heart, skin and other tissue samples taken from Kalinka's body to be analyzed at the Institute of Legal Medicine in Paris. Cut into thin slices and preserved in paraffin and chloroform since her death, the material, apart from the test tubes filled with her blood, which Wolfgang, if you remember him, discarded, led 3 French pathologists to a near certain conclusion. Wolfgang was the scientist at the Medical Institute in Germany who checked the autopsy report again and talked about the dangerous substance, so he misplaced the blood. Wonderful. We are missing the genitals from the body, and now we are also missing vials of blood. Just wonderful. While the available evidence didn't give the exact causes of Kalinka's death, she had died in a brutal manner. The pathologists concluded that the regurgitation of food particles into the respiratory tract testifies to a profound coma that would have led to a state of fatal respiratory distress. Asphyxiation and death would have occurred almost instantaneously after she received the injection in her right arm. The lack of blood samples made it impossible to find a definitive link between the intravenous substance and her death. Unlike in Germany, however, the findings were enough to persuade the French judiciary of Dieter's culpability. On April the 8th, 1993, the Prosecutor General charged Dieter Krombach with voluntary homicide, punishable by up to 30 years in prison. Quote, "The elements taken together lead to the conclusion that Dieter Krombach gave Kalinka Bamberski a mortal injection," the indictment declared, "not with a curative purpose, but with the intention of killing her." End of quote. And you would think that finally Kalinka gets justice, right? Wrong. Get ready for this. Oh boy, I'm gonna say this 10,000 times. I'm gonna sound like a broken record in this video. So the prosecutor in France asked German authorities to arrest Dieter. The German authorities, however, refused to do so. So on March the 9th, 1995, Dieter was convicted of murder in his absence at the Cour d'Assises in Paris and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Judicial authorities in Bavaria and Berlin in Germany, though, signaled that they considered the case against him closed and the French trial in absence illegal. Still residing by Lake Constance and working as doctor of internal medicine with a thriving practice, Dr. Dieter continued to lead a socially and physically active life. He was a member of an equestrian club and he kept a sailboat in Lindau's yacht club. He also kept a series of mistresses and carried on affairs in his own home. In 1989, he and Danielle divorced and she returned to live in Toulouse, still proclaiming Dieter's innocence. Around 2 years later, Dieter married his 4th wife, Elke Frelich, who was just like his 3 previous spouses, a decade younger than him. They divorced soon afterwards because of his, you guessed it, infidelities. The refusal of the German government to extradite Dieter seemed rooted in any number of motives. Opposition to extraditing a German national for a trial abroad had been enshrined in the post-war German constitution, although a legal exception could be made in the case of extradition to a member of the European Union or to an international court, as long as the legal principles of the German state are guaranteed. Repeatedly, prosecutors and judges and ultimately the Minister of Justice in Berlin fell back on the same justifications for why turning Dieter over for prosecution in France would violate those principles. The forensic examinations were inconclusive according to them. His account of Kalinka's death seemed plausible, and Kalinka's own mother had strongly maintained her husband's innocence. German authorities continued to express great confidence in the local prosecutor who had closed the books on the case in 1983. So now we are already in 1989. Kalinka died in 1982, 7 years earlier. In April 1990, the state prosecutor in Munich again found no reason to reopen the investigation. The German government would maintain for years after Dieter's in absence conviction that because its prosecutor had closed the case, the doctor could not be extradited to France. At the same time, the knowledge that he was safe inside Germany appeared to embolden Dieter. But he was unable to restrain the dark impulses that lay within him. On the afternoon of February 11, 1997, a 16-year-old girl called Laura Stiegel visited Dr. Dieter's clinic in Lindau for an endoscopic examination. His assistant was at lunch and Dieter just sent the girl into his examination room. He told her that the examination was going to be painful, so with her consent, he could give her an intravenous anesthetic that would knock her out. So Laura consented. Quote, "When I awoke, he was on top of me, totally naked," she would later recount to a French television station. "I was shocked. I tried to move. I was completely paralyzed." Dieter, believing that Laura would remain silent, I don't even know why he believed that, but anyway, he dropped her in front of her home. But Laura went straight to her parents, who reported the attack. That same evening, on 11th of February 1997, Andre receives a phone call from a reporter in Lindau who tells him that Dieter was in jail. Andre believed that finally Dieter was arrested for Kalinka's death, but he was told by this reporter that Dieter was actually in jail for raping a woman in his clinic. 6 months later, in August, convinced by Laura's detailed testimony and by lab tests on the semen taken from her body immediately after the attack, the German judge convicted Dieter of raping a minor, ordered him to surrender his medical license, and sentenced him to 2 years in prison. Then, because of no previous criminal record in Germany and also of course his prestige in the community being a doctor, the judge suspended the sentence and set Dieter free. Yes. Following the verdict, outraged protesters gathered in front of the courthouse, including 6 women who claimed that they had been raped by Dieter as well. All of these women kept quiet until then, either because of Dieter's stature in Lindau or because the anesthetic fogged their memories. Dieter dismissed these accusations. In an interview with a French radio reporter, he even blamed the victim. "The girl wanted to sleep with me. She started taking off her clothes. It was all over in 5 minutes," he said. He even made fun of Andre, who attended the trial and provoked an emotional confrontation in the courtroom. "This man is crazy," Dieter said. "It's ridiculous for Bamberski to think that I made love to his daughter. I didn't need to. I was married. I was happy with Kalinka's mother." And oh boy, you guys, if you watch his interviews, oh my god, I have watched the documentary and I'm gonna leave the name of the documentary. It's on Netflix, and this documentary has a lot of interviews with Dieter, and oh my god, it's just unbelievable the behavior of this man, the way that he's conducting himself and the way that he talks in such a passive way as if nothing seemed to be wrong. So he's raping them, but he's saying that he's making love to them. Oh my god, it's completely unbelievable. It's unbelievable. By this point, Andres' statute of limitations on his own German charges expired. You remember that he was charged for defaming Dieter and he wasn't allowed in Germany for 5 years. So at this point, that expired now. 2 years later, I believe in 1999, with Dieter free and the judicial processes against him at a standstill, both in Germany and France, Andre Bamberski returned to Germany. He drove slowly through the streets of a small German village near Lake Constance, a few miles from the Austrian border, to the house where Dieter Krombach now lived. Then, taking a deep breath, he knocked on his door and confronted him face to face. He told Dieter that he will always try to bring him back to France to be judged and he will never stop. Dieter told him that he was crazy and just wanted revenge, but Andre was certain that Dieter raped Kalinka and he told him, but Dieter threatened to call the police and then just closed the door in his face. By 1999, Andre quit his job to devote himself full-time to the hunt and capture of Dieter Krombach. Disappointed by the verdict, angered by the unwillingness of German authorities and the lack of urgency in the French government, Andre felt that he was being blocked at every turn. But he still clung to one hope, that police would seize Dieter during one of the frequent trips he made across the German border to Austria and Switzerland, then extradite him to France. So, Andre decided to visit Austrian and Swiss gendarmeries, police commissariats and customs posts, handing out photos of Dieter and files of newspaper clippings and judicial warrants. At times, Andre would be treated rudely, brushed off and treated like a lunatic. But other times, the police received him politely. They listened and they even agreed to keep the photos and study the files. At one point, Dieter's recklessness and Andre's persistence nearly led to Dieter's capture, and I say nearly. We are already in the year 2000. Remember that Kalinka was murdered in 1982. In 2000, a policeman on a train in Western Austria recognized Dieter from a photo that Andre distributed and arrested him. Dieter spent 3 weeks in jail before an Austrian judge accepted his attorney's argument that the trial in France was illegal and ordered his release. And again, just like that, Dieter was free. A few months later, in early 2001, the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, France, ruled that the country's in absence trials were inequitable because the accused had no opportunity to present his defense. The court then voided the verdict against Dieter and ordered the government to pay him 100,000 French francs, or the equivalent of $20,000. Not only did this add to Andre's frustrations, but now Dieter was becoming harder and harder to track. Of course that by this point Dieter was so confident, or should I say cocky, because he knows he's getting away with everything. You know criminals, how they become more and more confident the longer they evade capture, and in this case Germany was on his side allegedly. Dieter's reputation in Lindau is now ruined. His medical certificate confiscated, his fourth wife abandoned him, and so in 1999 Dieter embarked on a nomadic life, as in, constantly traveling from place to place. He seemed to change homes every 6 months, but Andre is still not giving up. Like I said at the beginning of this video, he is devoted entirely. He's completely dedicated to bringing Kalinka's killer to justice. Andre hired private detectives, he built a network of connections around Lake Constance, and he even followed Dieter himself, carefully documenting each change of address. Many of Dieter's movements, however, remained unknown. He would frequently disappear during the week and return home on weekends. Neither Andre nor his detectives could figure out where he'd been. During much of this time, Andre's own life in some ways mirrored Dieter's. He felt really alone, deserted by people close to him, sometimes on the verge of defeat, often straddling the line between legal and illegal. All his friends and family, including his father, told him it was time to quit, saying he's not going to achieve anything. But for Andre, not only that he, as a Slav, was very emotional, crying all the time when he thought of Kalinka, he felt that he has a moral duty. That was the most important thing for him, to just get the truth. He spent weeks on the road pursuing Dieter. During his time at home, he managed a website dedicated to the case and sent hundreds of letters to French senators, judges, prosecutors and other officials. He had only two sources of moral support during this time. His companion of 2 decades, who incidentally has the same name as his ex-wife Danielle, and the Association for Justice for Kalinka, a group formed in 2001 by Andre's neighbors, Professors Elizabeth and Yves Aragon, along with Elizabeth's brother, a Toulouse chemistry professor. The association grew to include almost 1,000 members, including homemakers, teachers, engineers, doctors, and attorneys. Some knew Andre personally, others were strangers who read newspaper accounts or saw TV news reports about the case and felt so outraged by Dieter's impunity that they offered support. Most of them lived in the Toulouse area, although in time the group became more international. Association members developed great loyalty to Andre Bamberski. The group secretary said about Andre that he is extremely passionate. He cries about the simplest things, but at the same time he's quite stubborn and pragmatic. If something doesn't work, then he tries something else. He refuses to be discouraged. In fact, Andre was so unrelenting in his quest that he eventually launched an audacious campaign intended to embarrass France's highest authorities into taking action. The campaign consisted of a barrage of complaints filed in court against the country's leading magistrates and the Minister of Justice, accusing them of corruption in blocking the pursuit of Dieter. François Gibault, one of France's most esteemed jurists and Andre's attorney since 1986, declined to represent Andre on the matter because of the awkwardness of the situation. He personally knew a lot of the judges and he didn't really want to get involved. But despite the recklessness of Andre's actions and the lack of any real results, François believed that Andre's instincts about a cover-up could well be correct. François said that it's certain that there were political contacts between Germany and France at a high level over this case. Even though Andre enraged some of France's highest officials with his allegations, François says that he never let his anger distract him from his ultimate goal or drive him to take shortcuts. He never lost his head. It would have been easier for Andre, to just kill Dieter, but Andre's aim all along was to bring him to justice. In early 2006, 24 years after Kalinka's death, an important piece of the puzzle about Dieter's movements fell into place. A woman in Redental in Central Eastern Germany went for a routine examination at the clinic of her regular physician, only to learn that he hanged himself that February. The woman was treated by his temporary replacement, whose odd behavior and unusual backstory made her quite suspicious. That evening, while looking up the man's name, Dieter Krombach, on the internet, she came across a German documentary about the death of Kalinka Bamberski and Dieter's rape conviction in Germany. Straight away, she contacted the police, telling them Dieter was working at the clinic. Meanwhile, Dieter, probably suspecting that something was not quite right, had already disappeared. The woman then managed to track Andre down on the web and told him what happened. Andre told her that through his own research, he knew that Dieter lived in a small apartment in a private home in Sidek. The woman then gave this information to the police and Dieter was located and arrested for practicing medicine without a license. Between 2001 and 2006, a police investigation later revealed that Dieter secretly found employment for periods of weeks or months as a substitute physician at 28 different clinics and hospitals across Germany. Having surrendered his medical certificate following his 1997 rape conviction, he would present a photocopy and claim that the original had been stolen. Until he was identified in Rodental, none of his employers or patients even bothered to check his background. So he's been working for more than 5 years without a medical license. Wonderful, wonderful. This just makes you wonder how many are doing the same. And honestly, it's frightening. Two psychiatrists examined Dieter at the University of Munich's hospital before his trial for fraud and practicing medicine without a license. They said that Dieter was a chronic liar, a sexual predator and a narcissist with delusions of grandeur and the belief that he was outside the law. He admitted to having a series of fugitive liaisons during his marriages, including most recently a sexual encounter with a 16-year-old niece of his cleaning lady who he drugged with Valium and another sedative. He showed indications of repression and denial, minimization of his own weaknesses, dodging conflicts, and the embellishment of his own reality. Dieter was also a compulsive who had serially molested patients and co-workers. If left without supervision in a clinic or other medical environment, he would do it again. After a 2-day trial, Dieter Krombach was found guilty and sentenced to 2 years and 4 months in prison. For Andre, who attended this trial as well, it was only a partial and temporary victory. In June 2008, after spending 18 months behind bars, Dieter returned to the German town of Seidegg, just inside the Austrian border, and Andre kept on going with watching. He was not going to let Dieter out of his sight. 16 months later, in October 2009, Andre heard from his sources that Dieter started working yet again as a substitute physician. So, Andre traveled to the town of Bregenz, Austria, which is on the southern shore of Lake Constance. The town was a 10-minute drive to Germany and just a few minutes further to the village of Seidegg. And so, it was a perfect spot for Andre to keep an eye on Dieter. Andre checked into the Ibis hotel near the lake. He drove across the border to Seidegg in search for information, hoping at least to send Dieter back to prison. Andre couldn't find out how Dieter was supporting himself, but he discovered something else. Dieter's landlord put the house up for sale and Dieter had to get out of the property before the end of October. Neighbors heard that he accepted a job in West Africa and was getting ready to leave. With each move, Dieter became harder and harder to track. If he would go to Africa, Andre might lose him forever. In early October, Andre receives a call in his hotel room from a man identifying himself as Anton, saying in English that he has a plan and he wants to see Andre about Kalinka, telling him that he can help Andre move Dieter and transport him to France. In Bregenz, the town near Lake Constance, Andre had raised the possibility of kidnapping Dieter with an Austrian private detective, but the detective refused to help him. And he even talked openly about the scenario with waiters in local restaurants, members of the hotel staff and others. So Andre thought that Anton must have gotten word of the kidnapping, from one of his acquaintances. So they met the next afternoon and they had a chat on a bench in a public park. Not minimizing his role in this plot, Andre says that the proposal to abduct Dieter came from Anton. Anton was a Kosovar immigrant in his 30s with longish hair and an open, friendly manner. He allegedly had connections with the Russian mob. He asked for only 20,000 euros to cover expenses, explaining that he was doing it for humanitarian purposes. A few days later, they took a scouting trip to Seidegg. They parked across the street from Dieter's apartment and Andre pointed out the terrace where Dieter did his morning calisthenics, which is a form of strength training. So Anton told Andre to go back to France and just sit tight and wait for a phone call. 1 week later, at 10 p.m., on October 17, 2008, Andre receives a call at home from a woman, most likely an accomplice, who spoke French with a heavy German accent. She told Andre to be ready to go to Mulhouse, which was the town just across the German border. 5 hours later, she called back, telling Andre that Dieter is in Mulhouse, at Rue du Tilou, across from customs asking Andre to warn the police. Andre calls and reaches the night duty officer in Mulhouse. He explains to the officer that he is Andre and he had a daughter, Kalinka, who was raped and murdered by Dieter, and there is an international warrant out for his arrest, indicating to the officer that he will find Dieter on the Rue du Tilou. The police officer told Andre that a woman with a German accent also called him just a few minutes earlier and gave him the same information. 20 minutes later, at 4 a.m., the officer calls Andre back. "We found him," he said, "and he's in bad shape." Immediately after Dieter told the police his story, Mulhouse police placed Andre under arrest and interrogated him for 2 days and nights. Andre did say that he never wanted to lie and he was delighted to find out that Dieter was there, but he didn't initiate this. Andre was asked by the police if he knew Anton Krasniqi. Andre told them that he knew an Anton, but Krasniqi was the first time he'd ever heard the name. Police were called to the scene of the kidnapping in Sidek by a neighbor who noticed a pair of broken eyeglasses, shoes and blood on the street. Nearby, they recovered a phone bill with Krasniqi's name on it. On the same day, police also found 19,000 euros in cash in Andre's hotel room safe, the cash that Andre agreed to pay Anton Krasniqi. Dieter's attorneys demanded that their client is released from custody and returned to his home in Germany. But French authorities reinstated the charges against him and ordered him remanded to prison in Paris to await trial for the murder of Andre's only daughter, Kalinka Bamberski. In trying to bring Dieter to justice, Andre accomplished his goal of nearly 3 decades. But he had also crossed ethical lines driven by his desperation and obsession. On the morning of October the 4th, 2011, remember Kalinka died in 1982, Dieter Krombach, at 76 years old, was transported from a prison hospital to a large courtroom and led by gendarmes into a box of bulletproof glass. His murder trial began at the end of March 2012. The defense lawyer Yves Levano said that Dieter Krombach was attacked, beaten and attached to a fence in a state of hypothermia. The trial got adjourned after a week because of Dieter's ill health. He had suffered from hypertension and heart problems for several years. After medical tests that autumn found him to be in reasonably good health, the president of the Cour d'Assises, the courthouse, Javier Siemoni, ordered Dieter to assume his place again in the dock.
Et je suis certain qu'on ira au bout du procès parce que il faut absolument, on ne peut pas remettre un procès d'assises dans quelque conditions que ce soit. Déjà le fait qu'il ait été suspendu et renvoyé la dernière fois, c'est quelque chose de tout à fait exceptionnel.
Évidemment, il faut que ça finisse. Évidemment, il veut qu'il ait prouvé son innocence, parce qu'il est innocent. Et c'est pour ça que je vous dis la même chose que la dernière fois. Je ne sais pas pourquoi on est là.
Nous l'avons trouvé très affaibli. Nous craignons qu'une audience au même rythme que l'année dernière, qui avait été qualifiée d'effrénée, conduise au même résultat. Donc, nous avons fait part de nos inquiétudes.
In the court, you had 3 black-robed magistrates, including the president of the court, joined by 9 jury members, the prosecutor, Dieter's German and French attorneys, the court stenographer, and Andre Bamberski, the civil plaintiff in the case. Under French law, this allowed Andre to question witnesses. Andre was joined by his son Nicolas, his Paris-based attorney François Gibault, and a lawyer from Toulouse, Laurent Decaune. His ex-wife Danielle Gonin was also there, who was called to testify by the prosecution. Dieter's two children from his first marriage, Diana and Boris, were also there, as well as 19-year-old Katya, his daughter from his fourth marriage, all in support for their father. Around 60 members of the public came to watch the trial, along with dozens of members of the press, mostly from French and German newspapers. Cameras were not allowed in court. There was also a firefighter trained in emergency care, ready to administer medical aid to Dieter if needed. The trial lasted for 15 days.
Andrei Bamberski spent years trying to bring the man he believes killed his daughter to court. Now he says he's serene.
I feel good. No, there hasn't been a face-to-face yet. I'm happy that the legal arguments are underway.
Kalinka Bamberski was found dead in 1982. She was just 14. She was staying in Germany along with her mother, who'd left her father for German cardiologist Dieter Krombach. Krombach is accused of killing her by injecting her with iron compounds. In the 1990s, a French court convicted the doctor in absentia of manslaughter, but Germany ignored extradition requests because authorities there had already cleared him. Then in 2009, Krombach turned up bound and gagged just over the border in eastern France.
The circumstances under which he arrived here and was put under French judicial proceedings are irrelevant. The French judicial system is now holding him, and it has to judge him.
The victim's father faces separate kidnapping charges over the abduction. Lawyers for Dieter Krombach say the whole thing should be dealt with by the European Court of Justice.
Given the mutual trust in the European Union, how is it possible that over the border Mr. Krombach is deemed innocent, but on this side the decisions of the German judiciary are ignored and he is accused? For us, it is an absolutely unacceptable situation.
Prosecutors say a number of German women have told them they were drugged and abused by Krombach. Whatever the outcome of the trial, it's revived a debate over legal cooperation within the European Union. Nadim Barber, Al Jazeera.
Dieter's lawyers argued that the trial was illegitimate since German prosecutors already dismissed the case and Dieter was brought to France by an illegal abduction. But the court declared that Dieter had never been properly tried in Germany and that the private action of an individual could not impede an act of the state. The court heard testimony from the French and German toxicologists and pharmacologists who had examined Kalinka's tissue samples, the doctors who had conducted the 1995 exhumation of her remains, and 5 French medical professors who had carried out a complementary forensic examination in 2010. In the pre-trial appraisal, the medical professors determined that the injury to Kalinka's labia could only have happened while she was alive, overruling the autopsy doctor's finding that it was a post-mortem tear. They also declared that the fluid in her private part could only have been semen. The violence against her was sexual. Analysis of Kalinka's lung and heart tissue using methods that didn't exist in the 1980s revealed the presence of benzodiazepine, a powerful anesthetic, conclusive evidence that Kalinka had been drugged the night of her death. 3 German victims of Dieter described how they had been put under anesthesia and raped. A psychiatrist who examined Dieter in prison portrayed him as a classic narcissist driven by the desire to influence others through charm or chemical means. Incapable of empathy or self-criticism, the psychiatrist testified, Dieter blamed others and denied his crimes, rearranging the facts to suit his self-image. The court heard from family members as well. Boris Krombach swore that his father was innocent and insisted he would never have laid a finger on Kalinka. Danielle Gonin, Kalinka's mother, on the other hand, she seemed a changed woman. Previously, she maintained that Dieter was completely innocent, but the court had already heard dramatic testimony that March in another courtroom in the same Palais de Justice, during which Danielle backed away from her previous defenses of Dieter. She described him as a seducer with an irresistible will. If he decided he wanted something, nothing could stop him, she testified. He chose me because I was married, which represented an additional challenge for him. He was especially attracted to girls in their early teens, she claimed. She called the attraction the lure of the forbidden. During her October testimony, Danielle recalled waking up around 9 o'clock, far later than usual, on the morning that Kalinka was found dead. She said that she suspected Dieter slipped her sedatives the night before. During a 2010 judicial inquiry, Danielle had learned that Dieter often put her to sleep with sedatives so that he could entertain his mistresses in their Lindau home. Danielle said that the forensic report was no longer enough for her. For 29 years, she asked no questions. Now, she said, I want to know the whole truth. Later on in the trial, Nicholas Bamberski, Kalinka's brother, who kept his feelings suppressed for decades, tried to express his family's sense of betrayal. How could you be satisfied with an unexplained death and have never tried to figure out what happened, he asked Dieter. I never saw you make any effort to find an explanation. The answer to Nicholas's question was quite awful. On Friday night, July the 9th, 1982, after the rest of the family went to sleep, Dieter encountered Kalinka in the kitchen, slipped her a sedative, raped her, and then executed her with a lethal injection of cobalt ferricide. He killed her because he lost it. He was thinking about the consequences and he got scared. And acknowledging that the scenario didn't fit Dieter's usual pattern of drugging and raping patients he barely knew, Andre suggested that the doctor was motivated by a desire for control over women and he had been driven to act against his own stepdaughter because time was running short. Kalinka had asked to move back to Toulouse and to no longer stay with Krombach. She was about to escape from him. That could have been a motive, but one will never know. One can never know, Andre said. The trial concluded at 3 in the afternoon on Saturday, 22nd of October 2011. It ended with a statement from Dieter Krombach. Quote, I swear before the court and before Madame Gonin that I never harmed Kalinka, end of quote. Then the 3 magistrates and 9 jurors went to deliberate. Andre waited in a cafe across the street and at 7 o'clock the police summoned him to the courtroom. Dieter Krombach stood and faced the magistrate's bench. His face showed no emotion when the president pronounced the verdict. Guilty of voluntary violence leading to unintentional death with aggravated circumstances. The crime was punishable by 30 years in prison. Dieter Krombach received a 15-year sentence, so he would have been 91 years old before being released. Andre's insistence that Dieter murdered Kalinka to silence her had been rejected by the court and there was no mention of sexual violence in the verdict. But Andre was satisfied that Dieter was exposed as a sexual pervert and that he would almost certainly die behind bars. Kalinka Bamberski is buried near Andre's home in Pechbask. After the trial, Andre felt like a great weight was lifted, something shared by close friends as well. Elizabeth, his neighbor, said that Andre was liberated from a duty and he's changed since the trial. He was more relaxed, playing golf, but still vigilant. Andre continued to keep a close eye on Dieter. He maintains an office in the back of his home filled with 30 years worth of folders, articles, letters, trial transcripts, forensic reports, police dossiers, psychiatric evaluations, and other documents. He knew that his daughter's killer, Dieter, received a handful of regular visitors, among them Dieter's daughter Katia and a representative from the German embassy in Paris. According to Andre, Dieter made at least 15 petitions to be released from prison and each one of them has been rejected. The German's lawyers filed an application for an appeal and the retrial was set to commence on November 26, 2012. Andre's biggest fear was that he will make a successful plea to serve the remainder of his sentence in a German prison. If that would happen, Andre had no doubt that the Germans would set him free. After his arrest in Mulhouse on suspicion of kidnapping, Andre Bamberski was released on bail but placed under judicial control. He surrendered his passport and is prohibited from leaving France. German prosecutors had filed an international arrest warrant against him, putting him into the same legal jeopardy that Dieter faced for a decade. Anton Krasniqi, who allegedly engineered the abduction, is currently living under judicial control in Mulhouse. According to his attorney in Toulouse, Andre will almost certainly be tried for conspiracy and kidnapping and he could wind up in jail for up to 10 years. But Francois believes that the strong support shown for Andre by the French public could result in a lesser sentence. Andre said that he's willing to accept time in prison at the cost of delivering Dieter Krombach to trial. He didn't regret the kidnapping because something had to be done. He said, quote, "You know the expression, I made the omelette, but it was also necessary to break the eggs?" End of quote. Andre generally visits Kalinka's grave several times a month, but the one visit that is planted most firmly in his mind took place just after Dieter Krombach was convicted of Kalinka's death. Placing flowers on the granite slab in the cemetery behind the Pechbusk Catholic Church, Andre spoke a few words to his daughter. "Kalinka, you see, I promised that I would give you justice. Now you can rest in peace." Dieter Krombach was imprisoned in France and the new trial was scheduled for 2011. Testimony of a German woman came to light who said that she had an affair with him when she was 16 years old. Dieter would drug his wife during their encounters. Several women testified at trial that Dieter had sexually abused them as teenagers, always using cobalt iron injections. On 22nd of October 2011, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison for causing intentional bodily harm resulting in unintentional death. The prosecutors believe that Dieter drugged Kalinka in order to rape her. The verdict was confirmed on appeal in December 2012. His lawyer immediately vowed to appeal further to the Court of Cassation, but the appeal was rejected on 2nd of April 2014. Dieter appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, claiming that he had been prosecuted twice for the same crime. The court rejected the appeal in March 2018, holding that the independent prosecutions in Germany and France were not ruled out by the European Convention on Human Rights. In 2016, a court in Melun ordered Dieter's release for health reasons, but the prosecution's appeal was unsuccessful and he remained imprisoned. He was eventually released from prison in February 2020 for health reasons, and he died on 12th of September 2020 in an old age home in Germany. Germany's demand to have Andre Bamberski extradited to stand trial for the kidnapping was rejected in 2009 by a court in Toulouse with the argument that he would be tried in France. Andre's trial for the kidnapping took place on 23rd of May 2014. He confessed that he had agreed to have Dieter abducted. He was given a 1-year suspended jail sentence. The prosecutor praised him for his courage and perseverance. Andre Bamberski, who is now 84 years old, says that 27 years after Kalinka's death, he wasn't really concerned about the consequences he would face. He was happy that he wasn't concerned, otherwise he would never have gone through with the abduction and justice would have never prevailed for Kalinka, so he doesn't regret anything, even the unjust backlash that he received. Anton, who took no payment for his part in the kidnapping, admits that he would have happily taken justice into his own hands when it came to Dieter Krombach. "I have 2 daughters, and although I am Catholic, whoever touches my children is dead," he says. "I told Mr. Bamberski that I can buy a bullet for £5 and another predator would have been gone. However, he only wished for him to be put before the court and get justice, and that wish was very important. Mr. Bamberski is a very kind man because he wanted him alive for him to go through the right channels of justice. He wouldn't have been able to live with himself if he was killed." Anton, whose daughters were then the same age as Kalinka, says that for him it was the fight for a father to get justice and to find the truth about his child. He fought for not just a day or a week, but for 28 years. So Anton was committed to help him. July 2022 marked 40 years since Kalinka's death, and Andre is determined to keep her memory alive. Remembering her, he says, "She was very beautiful, blonde, and most of all, she was free-spirited and very mature, almost like an adult. She gave me great happiness. I remember Kalinka not as she would have looked if she was 55 years old today, but as the almost 15-year-old girl she was when she was murdered. I visit her grave at least once a week to pray for her and leave flowers. I think about her every day." End of quote. And this, guys, was a lot. It was really a lot, but oh my god, this father's determination to get justice for his daughter knew no bounds, and he successfully did it. It took 30 years, I mean, how many people keep going for 30 years? It really is commendable. And yes, whilst I am against violence and taking justice into your own hands, on this occasion, I think that Andre did the right thing. He never gave up, and when seeing that no authorities is going to help him, he helped himself bring Dieter to justice. So, you know, hats off to him for doing this. There is a recent Netflix documentary on this case released this year called My Daughter's Killer. So if you are interested to watch it, you can head over to Netflix. And this documentary has testimonies from other victims of Dieter, and like I said, also interviews with Dieter, which are just unbelievable. It's really worth to watch. It's yeah, it's really worth to watch. It's I think an hour and a half, something like that. But yes, I highly recommend you watch the documentary so you can get a more in-depth view it's specifically into the character of Dieter. It's just, you can clearly see his narcissism there. It's clear. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please do let me know what do you think in the comment section down below. Also, I do take a suggestion, so leave me any suggestions you have in the comment section under this video. And for now, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!